Okay, so you think Ferrari gets rich building the fastest cars a rich person's money can buy. You've seen the red paint, heard the engine scream past 200 miles an hour, and figured the whole business model. Write a big enough check, drive the dream home. That check does not buy you anything. Not automatically, not even close. Ferrari can and regularly does refuse to sell you a car no matter how much money sits in your account. Every buyer goes through a private screening process run through Ferrari's dealer network, checking ownership history, driving record, even public reputation before a single order gets approved. In 2024, Ferrari delivered exactly 13,752 cars worldwide, on purpose, while the waiting list stretched into 2027 and beyond. That's not scarcity by accident. That's a company turning down billions in demand it could easily fill. By the end of this, you'll understand why an empty Ferrari factory line is worth more to the company than a full one, why the car itself barely makes money, and why saying no is Ferrari's most profitable move. To see why refusal became the business, you have to go back to one stubborn man in Modena. Enzo Ferrari spent 2 decades as a driver and manager for Alfa Romeo, running their racing team, Scuderia Ferrari, out of Modena starting in 1929. He wasn't building cars yet, he was testing ideas on a track, using someone else's factory and someone else's money. In 1939, after one disagreement too many with Alfa Romeo's management, he walked away and started his own small operation, Auto Avio Costruzioni, forbidden by contract from even putting his own name on a car for 4 years. Then came the war. His factory got converted to grinding machine parts for the Italian military, and Allied bombers flattened it. Ferrari rebuilt from the rubble in a small town called Maranello, and in March 1947 he finally drove his first true Ferrari, the 125S, a car powered by a modest 1.5-liter engine bolted to a barely finished frame. Here's the detail almost nobody remembers. Enzo Ferrari never actually wanted to sell road cars. He saw them as a necessary evil, a way to fund his real obsession, the racing team. That single attitude, cars exist to serve the sport, not the other way around, is the seed of everything Ferrari still does with scarcity today. For decades, Ferrari lived inside a much bigger, much duller company, Fiat and later Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. It made cars, sure, but on Wall Street it got priced the same way as any other car brand. Cheap, cyclical, tied to steel, and factories. Then, in 2014, Fiat Chrysler's CEO, Sergio Marchionne, made a decision that could have blown up in his face. He announced Ferrari would separate from Fiat Chrysler entirely, listing as its own public company in 2015 and 2016. Analysts modeled it the obvious way as an automaker and landed on an automaker's low valuation. Marchionne told them flatly they were doing the math wrong. He argued Ferrari didn't belong next to Ford or Fiat at all, it belonged next to Hermes and Rolex, priced like a luxury house, not a factory. To prove it, he committed Ferrari to something almost no car company had ever chosen on purpose. Cap production below demand permanently, and never chase volume again. Given how hard Fiat Chrysler needed cash at the time and how easy it would have been to just build and sell more cars, betting the entire valuation of the company on scarcity instead of growth was the riskier call, not the safer one. The market could have shrugged. It didn't. What Marchionne unlocked from that single bet now has a name inside Ferrari's own financial reports, and it starts the moment a buyer signs the order form. Ferrari has a term for this buried inside its own investor filings: mix and price variance. Nobody inside Maranello calls it that out loud. They call it personalization, or by its retail name, tailor-made. Here's how the trick works. Dollar by dollar, you place an order for, say, a 296 GTB, and the sticker price sits somewhere around $280,000 before you've touched a single option. That's the number everyone quotes. It is almost never the number anyone actually pays. Ferrari's tailor-made program hands you a private menu. A one-off exterior color mixed specifically for your car can add 25,000 to 50,000 euros on its own. Then come the carbon fiber inserts, the hand-stitched leather in a shade nobody else has, the interior trim pulled from a swatch book with hundreds of choices. None of these things cost Ferrari much to produce. A different can of paint cost Ferrari almost nothing extra to mix. Hand-stitching one more color of thread costs almost nothing extra in materials, but the price tag on that option can run into the tens of thousands because you are not paying for paint. You are paying to guarantee that no other Ferrari on the road looks exactly like yours. Think of it like a bakery that sells a plain cake for $10 and a custom decorated version of the exact same cake for $80. The flour eggs, and oven time barely changed. What changed is that you now own the only one. Ferrari's own 2024 results confirm the math works. The company reported that richer product mix and, in its words, increased personalizations added 386 million euros to operating profit in a single year, on top of everything the base cars themselves generated. That's not revenue from selling more cars. Ferrari delivered basically the same number of vehicles as the year before. That's revenue from selling the same number of cars for meaningfully more money each. Because buyers kept adding more to their build sheets, and because Ferrari never discounts and never sits on unsold inventory, thanks to that same waiting list, almost every euro of personalization spending drops straight to the bottom line instead of getting eaten by a future discount. Here's the plain version anyone can repeat back to a friend. The base Ferrari is basically the appetizer. Ferrari's actual profit shows up in the toppings you didn't know you needed until the dealer showed you the swatch book. And by then, walking away from 30,000 euros of paint felt smaller than the 280,000 you'd already committed to. This isn't a side hustle either. Research and development ate 894 million euros in a single recent year, the single largest cost on Ferrari's books, more than any other expense category, all in service of building cars worth customizing in the first place. Every dollar spent engineering a faster gearbox is also a dollar spent widening the menu of things a buyer will later pay extra to change. So if the paint and the stitching are where buyers notice the money leaving their pocket, where's the money Ferrari makes that customers never even see? Here's the part that never makes it onto a Ferrari billboard. Some of the company's fastest growing revenue has nothing to do with selling a car at all. Ferrari's own quarterly filings break revenue into several buckets, and one of them is labeled plainly sponsorship, commercial, and brand. In the second quarter of 2025, while the number of cars delivered stayed essentially flat at 3,494 units, that brand-related revenue line jumped 22% year over year. Read that again. The factory built basically the same number of cars it built the year before. The money coming from things that aren't cars grew by nearly a quarter. That's the hidden engine. It runs through three channels. First, Formula One. Ferrari is the only team that has competed in every single Formula One season since the championship began in 1950, and that 70-plus years of continuous racing pays out through sponsorship deals, TV rights, and a share of Formula One's own commercial revenue pool, money that lands on Ferrari's books whether or not a single road car ships that quarter. Second, licensing. The Ferrari name gets rented out to a theme park in Abu Dhabi, to a chain of branded retail stores, to clothing, watches, and accessories carrying the prancing horse logo, none of which requires Ferrari to bend a single piece of metal. Third, the racing halo effect itself. Every podium finish becomes free global marketing that a car company selling minivans could never buy at any price, and it convinces buyers on the waiting list from earlier that their six-figure order is really a stake in a 70-year racing legacy, not just a car. Here's the number that actually separates this mechanism from the personalization trick you just learned. Building and shipping a physical car costs steel, aluminum, carbon fiber, and skilled labor, no matter how you slice the margin. Licensing your logo to a theme park costs Ferrari almost nothing beyond a lawyer's signature on a contract. Selling F1 sponsorship space on a car that's already racing costs nothing extra either. That car was going to be on the track regardless. Think of it like a famous chef who owns one restaurant that's always fully booked and then licenses their name to 100 pans and cookbooks that sell whether or not anyone ever eats at the restaurant itself. The restaurant builds the reputation. The pans and cookbooks convert that reputation into money that scales without a single extra table. That's why this mechanism changes the entire picture the last one gave you. Personalization makes each car Ferrari does sell more profitable, but brand and racing revenue makes Ferrari money on days it sells zero cars. None of this explains, though, why Lamborghini, McLaren, or Aston Martin haven't simply copied the formula and built their own waiting lists. A handful of rivals have tried limiting production on paper. None of them have Ferrari's 75 years of consecutive racing history to license, and none of them can walk away from a buyer's blank check the way Ferrari can, and still have a line of qualified replacements around the block. So why hasn't Lamborghini or McLaren or Aston Martin or even Porsche simply copied the playbook and built the exact same machine? Because most of what makes this work took decades to build and can't be assembled with a checkbook, no matter how large. Start with the racing history. Ferrari is the only constructor that has competed in every single Formula One World Championship season since it began in 1950, 75 consecutive years without a gap. Lamborghini has never fielded a Formula One team at all. McLaren has real racing pedigree of its own, but it entered F1 in 1966, 16 years after Ferrari, and its road car business only began decades later, never fusing racing and road cars into one continuous story the way Ferrari's history did. You cannot buy your way into 75 years of continuous history. You can only accumulate it one season at a time, and every year a rival spends trying is another year Ferrari's own head start widens. Now add the buyer vetting system, which is arguably even harder to copy than the racing history, because it requires a brand willing to say no to its own richest customers. Ferrari runs potential buyers through its dealer network, checking ownership history, driving record, even public behavior, before approving an order. And for limited editions, the screening gets stricter still. Casino mogul Steve Wynn reportedly lost his Ferrari dealership privileges after trying to resell a limited edition car for profit. Boxer Floyd Mayweather ran into the same wall for buying and quickly reselling high-end models. Most luxury brands would never risk alienating a billionaire customer over a resale rule. Ferrari does it constantly because the blacklist itself is the moat. Every rejected buyer proves that access is real and worth protecting, which makes the remaining slots more valuable. Try to copy that overnight and you'll just lose sales because your brand hasn't earned the right to say no yet. Then there's the resale market, which compounds everything else. Limited edition Ferraris regularly resell for roughly double their original sticker price once deliveries begin, because so few exist and demand from collectors outstrips them instantly. That appreciation isn't a side effect. It's proof to every future buyer that a Ferrari order isn't really a car purchase. It's closer to buying a limited-run asset that happens to have a V12 in it. A competitor trying to copy this would need collectors to already believe their cars hold value the way Ferraris do, and that belief itself took decades of consistent scarcity and racing wins to build. You cannot manufacture that belief with a single new model announcement. Finally, there's the manufacturing itself. Engines are still hand-assembled at the Maranello plant by a small number of specialists, each signing the engine block they built, craftsmanship that becomes impossible once a company scales into the hundreds of thousands. This is the flywheel that keeps spinning on its own. Scarcity drives resale value up. Rising resale value convinces more qualified buyers to apply. More qualified applicants let Ferrari's dealer network get even more selective about who gets a car, and tighter selectivity deepens the scarcity that started the whole cycle in the first place. Every year that flywheel spins, the gap between Ferrari and whoever is trying to catch up gets wider because the moat isn't one wall, it's four walls reinforcing each other at once. Racing history, buyer psychology, resale economics, and craftsmanship. But the moat isn't only structural, it also lives inside your own head every time you look at that logo. Psychologists have a name for what you feel reading all of this. Scarcity bias, the very human tendency to want something more, not less, the moment you learn you might not be allowed to have it. Ferrari has effectively industrialized that bias. Notice what happened as you read the last section. You didn't get angry that regular buyers get rejected. If anything, wanting a Ferrari a little more than you did 5 minutes ago probably crossed your mind, even without wanting to own one. That reaction is the entire point. Every rejected celebrity story that leaks into a gossip column, every screenshot of a resale price double the original sticker, functions as free advertising that makes you, someone who will likely never sit in one, still recognize the logo instantly and still associate it with something aspirational rather than merely expensive. That's identity signaling at work. You are not just being sold horsepower. You're being sold a story where owning this specific object means something was earned, not simply purchased, the same way owning a home in an exclusive neighborhood signals something beyond the square footage. Ferrari reinforces this constantly through its dealer relationships, encouraging long-term owners to build a purchase history across smaller models before ever being considered for something like a Daytona SP3 or a LaFerrari successor, turning the entire buying journey into something closer to earning membership in a club than filling out a purchase order. By the time you're eligible for the car everyone actually wants, you've spent years proving you belong there, which means wanting it that badly was never really about the car at all. Airtight as this sounds, regulators and the road ahead don't care how good the story is. None of this is bulletproof, and Ferrari's own regulatory filings admit as much. The company explicitly warns investors that because it produces such a small number of car models compared to a mass manufacturer, any single misstep, a bad launch, a recall, a design that misses, creates far more volatility in its financial results than it would for a company selling 1 million cars a year. Emissions and safety regulation is a live threat too. Evolving fuel economy, emissions, and connectivity rules across Europe and the United States could force costly redesigns and limit which cars Ferrari is even allowed to sell in certain markets, pushing the company toward hybrid and electric models faster than its craftsmanship first culture may want to move. Then there's geography. Mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan made up 8% of Ferrari's net revenues in 2024, and the company has flagged slowing economic conditions there as a genuine risk to future growth, even as it insists the region remains a smaller piece of its expansion plans. Tariffs on European auto imports into the United States surfaced as a real cost concern through 2025 as well, in a market that already generates close to 30% of Ferrari's revenue. None of these threats guarantee anything goes wrong, but a business built entirely on being the one thing everyone wants and can't quite have only works as long as regulators, geopolitics, and buyer taste all keep cooperating at the same time. And none of those three are things Ferrari actually controls. So what happens if even one of those three stops cooperating in the next few years? Picture the optimistic path first. Ferrari's order book already stretches through 2027. Buyers keep piling personalization spending onto every car in the pipeline, and the company hits the roughly 7 billion euros in revenue and near 40% EBITDA margin it guided toward for 2025, arriving a full year ahead of its own 2026 profitability targets. In that version, the hybrid and electric transition happens on Ferrari's own unhurried terms. Each new model sells out before it's even revealed, and scarcity keeps compounding exactly the way it has for a decade. Now picture the harder version. China's luxury spending keeps softening for longer than expected, cutting into a market that already represents real global revenue for Ferrari, while European emissions rules tighten faster than the company's engineering roadmap can comfortably absorb, forcing rushed, expensive redesigns instead of the leisurely pace craftsmanship usually demands. The bigger risk sits further out. That order book covering 2027 and pushing into 2028 will eventually run dry, and when it does, Ferrari has to prove all over again with no existing waitlist to point to. That demand still outruns supply. If a fully electric model lands with less emotional pull than a screaming V12, even loyal buyers might hesitate, and hesitation is the one thing this entire business model was built never to experience. What tips it one way or the other isn't the cars themselves. It's whether buyers keep believing that scarcity is real and not manufactured, whether regulation moves at a pace Ferrari can absorb, and whether the racing program keeps winning enough to keep the whole story feeling earned. Which brings you back to that blank check sitting on the dealership desk. That blank check was never the obstacle. It was the least interesting thing in the room. Ferrari doesn't make money because you can afford one. Ferrari makes money because it decided on purpose that most people who can afford one still shouldn't get one, and then built an entire company. The racing, the paint, the vetting, the resale value around making that refusal the most profitable sentence in the automotive industry? Not yet.